Today I'm going to replace the paper filter in a 2011 Nissan Altima CVT transmission. This paper filter is not commonly known. Generally, when you go online and look up the transmission filters, you get the wire mesh filter that's attached to the bottom of the valve body. I also picked up 8 quarts of non-OEM transmission fluid for a flush. Since it's not under warranty, I'm going to use the non-OEM. I also purchased a Nissan branded auxiliary transmission cooler as well. And the kit was $150 online. It comes with all the hoses and brackets and hardware. Lastly, I'm going to also do some improvements to the radiator water cooling side of the equation, since the transmission gets cooled by the water in the radiator. I'm going to improve the thermal properties of the radiator to help aid in cooling the CVT transmission, since a lot of the failures that appear online are heat related. So hopefully I can save off some overheating and some early failures of the CVT transmission. I happen to have a fluid extractor, so in lieu of dropping the transmission pan to get the fluid out of the bottom of the transmission, I'm going to utilize this tool. All you do is stick the hose down the charging port, you pump the handle a few times, and it'll vacuum the oil out of the pan. Okay, to start, I'm going to remove a couple things. I'm going to remove the front grille, I'm going to remove the battery, and I'm going to remove the fresh air intake that goes to the fresh air filter box. Okay, this is where the auxiliary cooler will be mounted, and there's detailed instructions from a TSB dated October 13th of 2016, and the title is Reduced Performance Due to CVT Fluid Temperature Protection Logic, and it gives you detailed instruction on how to do this install as well. Okay, I'll try to zoom in with a flashlight and show you the 3 anchor points for the factory OEM cooler install. The 3 anchor points, let me get a flashlight, and there's the first one right there. The second anchor point's over about 8 inches to the right. There's the second anchor point, and the third anchor point is up to the right-hand side, about 8 inches up to the right. And just point the bolts from the back, point them towards the front bumper, and slip the auxiliary cooler on top of the bolts and put the nuts on, and you're done. Okay, if you look below the radiator hose, there is a small black line with a banjo bolt running through it. That is connected to the housing, and behind that housing is where your paper filter is. I'm going to remove the metal return line attached to the housing first. There's a banjo bolt on the left, and there's a 10mm bolt that's attached to a bracket that's welded to the metal line as well. Here's the top of the upper transmission line. This is a view of the casing removed, but the filter is still attached to the side of the transmission. It's right below the radiator hose. It's kind of hard to see in this picture, but you can kind of see the metal edge of the bottom of the paper filter media that's there. All right, this is what the filter looks like, and there's a lot of different part numbers on this filter that are wrong. There's a person in the nissanclub.com forum. He goes by Altima S 2010, and the title is 2 CVT trans filters, external fine and internal mesh. Search that, then you'll find the correct numbers for your vehicle possibly. All right, the OEM kit says to replace this rubber portion of the hose with the new hose supplied. With the lower valance removed, here's a good view of the 3 mounting holes for the OEM cooler. Here's what the cooler looks like mounted. One strange footnote, the instructions say to route the transmission line, the upper transmission line, which is the output, and route it into the top of this cooler, which now create a waterfall effect. It may cause foaming inside the cooler. I hope this instruction is not an error. And here's another view of the cooler. This is looking from the top of the radiator, looking down towards the ground. This is what you'll see. And here, as I'm just starting the extraction of the old transmission fluid, this line is just shoved down the charging port of the transmission, pulling the old fluid out. All right, a couple minutes later, looks like I've pulled out about 1 gallon of transmission fluid out of the pan. That's typical for these cars. And you can see the air bubbles and the line showing that it's pulling air now, so the fluid is depleted out of the pan. Okay, I removed the clear line out of the charging port and I temporarily inserted it into the transmission return line. I then filled the transmission with 7 quarts, overfilling it by 3 quarts. But then I turned on the ignition and I pumped out the overfilled 3 quarts into this container. Okay, I emptied the vacuum container into some empty gallon jugs and I got about 7 quarts that I extracted totally out of the transmission. So it's a full flush. Now, another way to improve the cooling performance of your radiator is if you live in a southern climate in the US, you can get away from the 50-50 premixes, which I think they protect freeze down to minus 34 degrees Fahrenheit. I'll never see those cold temperatures, so I'm going to change the mix to a more generic 70-30 mix, and that should give me protection somewhere down to about 10 degrees Fahrenheit, which is ample for the area of the country I live in. Now, be certain to change your coolant if you decide to get into colder weather. You need to get back in a 50-50 mix, or in the future, if you go to sell the car, it's best probably to go ahead and drop this performance mix back and get a more conservative mix of a 50-50 just so that you could protect the future buyer. Okay, I've taken a sample from the new mixture that I have in my radiator, and I have a glycol tester which measures the amount of glycol to water ratio, and there's an arrow pointing at the degrees of protection, and it's showing that I have protection down to about plus 10 degrees Fahrenheit, which I'm well covered for the area of the country that I live in. All right, I warmed up the car and I plugged in the orange OBD2 reader into the port underneath the steering wheel, and I downloaded this app from the Play Store. I think it was a couple dollars, CVT Z50, and I have brought my transmission temperature fluid up to 140 degrees Fahrenheit, and I just checked the dipstick, and I am halfway up the hash marks on the dipstick, so I am good to go. Hope you enjoyed.